Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
When the Department of Government Efficiency moved into Social Security, it promised modernization. But the focus on splashy headlines missed the opportunity to fix a broken system. Joining Federal Drive host Terry Gerton earlier to explain what really happened and the challenges ahead is Eli Hager, reporter for ProPublica.
Let's start at that beginning. What was DOGE's mission when it arrived at SSA?
They had seen some data at the Treasury Department indicating that Social Security wasn't keeping its death records up to date. And Elon Musk thought that this might be an indicator that payments were going out to quote unquote dead people or to people pretending to be dead people. And they wanted to go to Social Security to access Social Security's own data and see if that was true.
And how did that play out when they actually got there?
So they sort of stuck with that theory even when the data didn't justify it. Basically, what happened was there was a big struggle within SSA about whether to even give DOGE access to the data, which led to a change in commissioner, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But then once they did have access to the data, a young DOGE programmer named Akash Baba created a table in which he found that over 12 million people who are over the age of 120 were still listed in Social Security's data. So that part was true. The data was out of date in that sense for a lot of reasons, including that dates of death hadn't been recorded decades ago, or people didn't know their birthdays back when Social Security was first started, and all these historical reasons for that. But he made clear to Elon Musk that that didn't mean that these people were getting any payments. So there were these dead people in the data, but they were not getting benefit payments. Nonetheless, Elon Musk tweeted about, vampires receiving Social Security benefits. And then soon after that, President Trump delivered an address to Congress and to the American people saying that these millions of dead people were receiving benefits.
And how did that affect the morale inside the Social Security agency?
Well, the morale was already pretty low. Most Social Security officials and staff had already seen what DOGE was doing at other federal agencies in terms of dismantling the workforce and cutting staff and sort of ignoring federal workers' expertise and cutting programs and grants and all of those sorts of things. So morale was low because of what they'd been seeing at other agencies. But there was another thing going on at the SSA, which was sort of interesting, which was that a smaller cohort of sort of tech-minded officials at the SSA were actually, or had been, a little bit excited about DOGE or intrigued at the possibilities, because in many ways the SSA is an outdated agency, at least internally. I mean, it still does a good job delivering benefits, but it relies on computer code that dates back to the early 80s in many instances, that only a few programmers are still there to be able to understand all the complexities of. And all of its systems are sort of taped together, in this way that's very complex and hard to understand. And people like DOGE, who are these top technologists, maybe could have helped solve some of those problems and make things easier for Social Security staff. There's like 60,000 pages of policies, and maybe DOGE could have helped build search tools to help staff navigate all those and that kind of thing. But that excitement quickly dissipated when officials and staff saw that DOGE was so focused on this incorrect evaluation of the death data.
Well, your report or your article reports on hours of interviews with Leland Dudek. Just refresh our listeners' memory on who he is and what he had to say then about the agency.
Right. So Leland Dudek had been just a sort of a mid-level official at the Social Security Administration for many years. He had bounced around the agency in part because he had sort of a temperamental streak and didn't necessarily do well as a manager. And he himself acknowledges that at times he broke rules to try to get things done. He was one of those people that is from a computer background and saw some of the inefficiencies in how the tech worked within Social Security and sort of wanted those things to move faster and to, quote unquote, break through the bureaucracy. And so when Donald Trump won the election in November 2024, and just kind of rumors of this idea of DOGE began to swirl, this idea of like a government efficiency project, Dudek was quite interested in that, even though he'd actually been a lifelong Democrat and voted for Kamala Harris, but he was interested in this idea of sort of an efficiency SWAT team coming in to work on some of Social Security's outdated technological processes. So he did something that he'd done a lot in his career, and he went around his bosses to reach out to some of the people at tech companies who he knew from his past work. And he, through them, he connected with the people who would become DOGE, and sort of he became the conduit between DOGE and the SSA. And he was eventually put on administrative leave around that in early February. But then suddenly he told me that, you know, he was in his underwear watching TV while he was on leave when he got an email stating that the president of the United States was making him acting commissioner of the whole agency. So it was a dramatic promotion above many more qualified people in the senior executive service. And he then became acting commissioner of the agency from February through May, and ran the agency in quite a chaotic way, although he says there was some strategy behind it, which we can talk about.
I'm speaking with Eli Hager. He's a reporter with ProPublica. Well, let's talk a little bit about that strategy, because one of the assertions that comes through in your article is that the DOGE team really prioritized optics over impact. So how did Mr. Dudek get involved in that, and how did that play out?
Right. So as mentioned, Dudek and some other officials at Social Security had a level of hope for DOGE, that they could really solve some of Social Security's internal problems, especially with its software and some of the inefficiencies at the agency. But when they saw that DOGE, as you said, was aiming for these quick wins that they could tweet out, like, you know, we found these dead people in the data, or when they saw that there was some evidence of fraud coming in through the phone lines, just shutting down phone service for beneficiaries at one point, and things like that they could sort of quickly take credit for and put on their website that they had saved this much, and closing divisions of the SSA that they thought were unnecessary without really learning what those divisions were. Those types of things. When Dudek saw that they were prioritizing those quick wins, he sort of took this behind the scenes strategy. Because in public, he was still presenting as a DOGE supporter. You know, he has a bombastic style. He was very sort of like deferential to President Trump and the White House, and he thought that would sort of win him points with them so that he could stay in that position and continue to try to direct them toward the issues that really mattered. But behind the scenes, he was leaking to the media repeatedly about what DOGE was doing. And he was trying to do things in such a way that they would get attention from the media and advocates so that he could quickly undo those things. Like in one instance, DOGE instructed him to cancel 2 contracts with the state of Maine, and it seemed to him that the only reason for that was that President Trump at the time was in a fight with Maine's governor, if people recall that long ago. And he didn't want to do that. He thought it would be harmful to cancel the contracts, but he canceled the contracts, but he did it in such a way that he thought would get so much attention that he would be able to reinstate them almost the next day, which is exactly what happened. So he took this sort of chaotic behind the scenes approach to trying to undermine what DOGE was doing, which he maintains prevented worse from happening, but also caused a lot of consternation and distress for beneficiaries around the country who didn't know what was going on.
There certainly has been a lot of churn and turmoil at Social Security over the last few months. Has anything kind of settled down now with Commissioner Besignano being appointed and DOGE sort of maybe getting their footing? Is it a little bit more normal there?
So the 5,500 to 7,000 staff who lost their jobs during the spring and now into the summer and fall are not coming back. So those losses are profound, and there's been good reporting by the New York Times and the Washington Post about how that is being felt at field offices around the country that are understaffed and can't respond to beneficiaries' needs. And there's been a real loss of expertise at the agency because a lot of the people who left were sort of the people who were close enough to retirement to be able to retire, or the ones that had the expertise or experience to be able to get other good jobs. And so there's a real brain drain that's happened there that I think they're still grappling with. But I do think things have calmed down in the sense that Bisignano has made a real priority of certainly reducing leaks. He himself is not leaking to the media, to my knowledge. He's the sort of volume of news stories describing chaos at the agency is much less than it was in the spring. Dudek, his strategy was sort of to do that by design. He wanted the public and advocates to know sort of the level of chaos that DOGE was creating. And so that transparency was designed, but Bizzinato has kept things closer to the vest. And I do think has prioritized a level of sort of like calmer efficiency, just in the sense of running an agency.
Eli Hager is a reporter with ProPublica. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive, along with a link to his article. You can also listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.